welcome to Co-Opinions. My name is Josh, and today I have Nick on.
Hi, Josh.
So, we're going to talk about the game Illusion of Gaia today because both Nick and I have a very strong passion for this game. But it's been a minute, so Nick, why don't you tell me the stuff you've been playing and some gaming news that's caught your eye?
Sure. So recently I have been playing Dragon Quest VIII. I actually just, in that game, you kind of start off and you have this big bad villain, Dual Magus, kind of a mad jester with this scepter who's cursed the kingdom, who you're pursuing. So I'm about 35 hours in, and I've just recently beaten him, which was a interesting experience. He is a very challenging JRPG boss fight. He starts off with 3 different forms, and you have to destroy the weaker forms and then fight him. And then you have a back-to-back boss fight where you're thrown into another encounter where he's got yet another full life bar with no chance to heal up or anything like that. That was real interesting. I remember when I played through this game when it first came out, that was something where I had to basically go back to the drawing board. I couldn't beat him as a kid, and I had to go grind for a while. I was kind of refreshed to do this with a little bit more robust of an internet era resources at my side. I couldn't really find much good info on grinding whenever I was beating him as a kid, and then to beat him this time, I read up before even trying him about, oh yeah, here's a spot where a bunch of metal slimes, the famed enemies that give you a lot of experience.
Hey.
Just tossed on a podcast. Might I recommend the Behind the Opinion with Chris for this kind of feature? You're welcome, Chris. And so I was able to get strong enough where I was able to beat him quite handily. So that was kind of interesting, just going back and having a game enemy encounter that completely schooled you the first time around, that through proper preparation the second time you play the game was able to go ahead and do. Other than that, I've also been playing Golf Story. So that's the game on the Switch where it's a golf RPG. The RPG elements are honestly a little bit light. I mean, you're exploring around in the world, there's dialogue, and yes, you do level up and have stats, but the way the stats affect things is honestly small enough that I still kind of think of it basically as being a golf game. That's been a lot of fun. I think the scene of the greatest wackiness of which I can describe is there was a portion recently where I was shooting golf balls from the top of a concession cart, trying to destroy undead skeletons that people were resurrecting. These undead skeletons were going to have eyes of golf balls because the mind-controlled moles, which had been gathering things for these, had been... Josh is starting to fade a little bit, folks, so I think I'm just going to leave it at that.
I'm giving the leery eyes right now. It doesn't translate well over text, but I'm tilting my head back and squinting the eyes, be like, where's this going now?
It was really bizarre. I mean, a lot of the story is honestly just, well, you're this guy who wants to go pro and no one really believes in you, and nothing... It's a functional story, but it's not really out there in any way. And then all of a sudden you have this guy who's obsessed with the moles, and I was like, oh, okay, so is this going to be like a Caddyshack reference kind of thing? And when they took it in the Undead Army kind of direction, I was like, okay, well, that is a refreshing twist on the Caddyshack formula. But that's been a lot of fun, minus the 40 minutes of lost progress I had the other day.
Ooh.
I had entered into this challenge where I basically had to clear a little section within 15 shots or less, and I screwed it up 2 shots in and was frustrated. So I was trying to just exit out, and I was like, well, I'll just quit to the title screen because it autosaves from what I've seen before of this. It does not, in fact, autosave. It does save whenever you're changing your screens, and you can choose to save and exit and all that. But since I had been doing a bunch of stuff on kind of the overworld of this golf course, a lot of little golf challenges, it didn't keep or save any of that. So that game I got the brakes on for the moment.
Makes sense. Yeah, it's very frustrating when you play a game nowadays that doesn't have autosave, especially when it's not a port of an older game. Like, you can make the case for an older game, well, it didn't used to have autosave. And sometimes it actually breaks the immersion tremendously when they include autosave. But when a recent game doesn't have it, you have an instance like that where you're like, what year is it?
Right, I just assumed every challenge I cleared it was automatically saving.
Right.
Granted, most of these games will have a little icon that flashes so that you know, and it would have been nice if they had that, but
yeah.
Oh well. I did have some gaming news to go into, but would you like to talk about what you've been playing recently first?
Yes, please. I'll grind through this fairly fast. I won't touch on this much, but I did get through Fallout 4 and most of the associated DLCs. I'm hoping to turn this into a podcast down the road, so I'm not going to touch on it a lot. It was good. I can't say it wasn't good because I put 50 hours into it. But I didn't feel like it had the scope, the epic scale of the third game, which I felt the third game was a little too black and white in terms of morality. And I felt the fourth game, also Fallout 4, also didn't have the moral ambiguity of New Vegas, which I loved because there was distinctly no good person in this game. You do kind of get the vibe that there's a sort of good and a sort of bad person in 4, but The last mission, I was so unaware it was the last mission that I saved in the middle of it. I'm like, I'll come back to this later. I came back to it about 3 days later because I was dead set on playing some video games that day. Beat the final mission. They're like, congratulations, you beat Fallout 4. That was it? Like, it didn't have that final check mark that for Fallout 3 it was, siege the water purification plant, and for New Vegas it was determine the control of New Vegas. Like, this one was just
the battle for the Hoover Dam was a great ending sequence.
It really, really was. Anyway, so I'm going to talk more about this much more in depth later.
I do just want to say with Fallout 4, it's really incredible just the hype that was surrounding that when it came out, and just how quickly that hype kind of died down, and everyone was like, well, that was okay, I guess.
Well, and we touched on this in one of our much earlier podcasts. The DLC backlash was enormous for that game. They promised things they did not deliver on, and then decided to charge people more. But again, I'll touch on this much more in depth in a later podcast. And besides that, I picked up the game Ghost Trick because I heard that it was very similar to the Sexy Brutale. The idea is similar, the execution couldn't be more different, but it was a delightful game. You talked this up to me 7 years ago at this point, and I'm glad I finally got around to it because it was an awesome game with an awesome soundtrack, and it makes me sad it didn't do better because it was a very solid game. If you're a fan of puzzle games, I would highly recommend looking into it. The idea behind it is whenever you find a dead person, you go back 4 minutes before they died and have to manipulate inanimate objects in order to prevent their death. If you've listened to played the Sexy Brutale, this sounds very similar to going back in time to prevent people's death by interacting with inanimate objects. But we're actually going to have an episode about the Sexy Brutale where I'll touch on the different approaches they take. Because it's different enough that you can say they're similar, but Kraus, if you ever play the Sexy Brutale, you'll see the difference. I also have started up, I'm trying to remember because they don't call it Lady Layton anymore because there was a big pushback because of that. I believe it's Catriel and the Millionaire's Conspiracy. It's the newest Layton game where you play as Layton's daughter. It got a lot of pushback because it's a little sillier than the previous incarnations. But, man, those Layton games got so...
How silly was it whenever you had the little mind control juice or whatever, and that's why everyone thought that the one guy in the diabolical box was this handsome young man and not just some old guy.
Well, and that's the thing about it, is when people are saying, oh, you're trying to help a talking dog. Like, do you remember in the first game where, this is a decade old at this point, so I don't care about the spoiler, but you were dealing with a city full of robots designed to make this little girl feel better. The second game was all a hallucination based on mystical Gaia. They actually poke fun at that at the beginning of this game because a dog comes asking you for help. And she's like, do you not have a mystical hallucinogenic box or ancient civilizations or a garden hidden from time? I'm like, wow, they're even rolling on their own series at this point. I'm enjoying it. It's nothing super engaging as of now, but I'm only through the first chapter. As of now, this will be the last 3DS game I play. It's had a good run, but we're seeing the 3DS wind down as the Switch is taking prevalence. Even though Nintendo is going to continue supporting, air quotes, continue supporting all pillars of their industry, air quotes.
It's been 7 years for the system. It's had a very good run.
It had a great run. At least they'll give it a nice send-off, unlike the Wii U, where they said, we'll continue supporting it and then stop production the next month. Unfortunate. Did we want to touch on how Sonic Mania was amazing real fast?
So good.
It was very good. I know I picked it up because... Did I pick that up because I got my PMP? I can't remember why. Oh, it was because of taxes. That's why I picked it up. I remember I just knuckled down and burned through it because it was amazing. And I went, Kraus, you have to pick this up. I know you've been holding off, but you need to pick this up. They did it right. They figured it out.
I am still very glad that I held off on it. I enjoyed Sonic Forces, including the 2D portions of Sonic Forces, but I know that I would have been like, what is this, after doing Sonic Mania?
Yeah, that game, the new stages, they weren't all sterling, but Studiopolis and Metallic Madness and
Metallic
Titan.
Madness is from Sega CD.
Is it?
The Sonic CD, yeah.
I had no idea. That's the one 2D one I haven't played because it was not super accessible and I don't really want to hook up my PS3. So
that's fair.
But I really liked it. We could at some point go into it more in depth because I feel like we could probably talk about 2D Sonic games on their own.
Just really quickly, I'm curious. So you liked Studiopolis Zone and Mirage Saloon quite a bit. As far as the two new zones that you disliked, then which one you disliked? Press Garden.
So it just felt a lot like Marble Garden to me, which isn't bad. It's just Studiopolis and Mirage Saloon. Those felt incredibly unique. Press Garden didn't. It just felt like they were trying to tribute other green zones they'd done before.
I thought that the belts that they had with that were a neat little platforming thing where it's kind of almost a floaty sort of thing that you could bounce off of for those newspaper press reels. And then you had the disappearing blocks as well with the little letters that came in and out. So I thought
I did not like that. I did not like the disappearing blocks because I didn't like those in Mega Man.
Fair enough.
So
you don't have any bottomless pits for this, though.
That is true. And at least in this one, they give you an indication of where the blocks are coming more obviously. What was the other new zone? Was that just Titan Monarch?
Yeah, Titan.
That was too long. I know why it was long, but when you get to the boss, they reset the timer. They know how long that is.
I liked Metallic Madness a lot more as kind of an in my mind final zone. Design-wise, there were some throwbacks to Scrap Brain and to Metropolis for that one. Mm-hmm. And the jumping back into the background, that 3D mechanic was well done.
That was cool.
Titanic Monarch, I felt was more trying to, or Titanium Monarch, whatever it was.
Titan Monarch, I believe, but yeah.
That one I felt was trying to intentionally disorient me and make me feel like I never had any sense of my bearings. And mission accomplished. It's just I didn't enjoy that.
That was the problem, is that it wanted to try to address a whole bunch of things by having like a hub, and then you go out and. I feel like we should come back to this at a later point because Sonic Mania is, I'm not going to call it the best endpoint for the 2D series, but it is a game that knew its roots and acted on them tremendously. The one criticism I will continue to have is the special stages taken from Sonic CD are garbage. I got all the Chaos Emeralds, but they were not fun.
Are they garbage or are we bad at them?
I saw online... If we're bad at them, almost all of the internet's bad at them. Because when I went online to find out, what am I doing wrong? People were consistently like, this is the worst part of this game.
Gotcha.
So, and apparently it's still better than how they were in Sonic CD. Anyways, let's go ahead and burn through news real fast because we're eating up a lot of time here. Okay. So, why don't you go first, Nick?
I guess I'll speak to my disappointment with Final Fantasy 15 and Square Enix. They have the, I think at this point this news is a few weeks old, but the announcement of the Royal Edition with the DLC pack for that for the early access people who paid for this game at launch, still to be determined. That had been announced at $20, and since then they've announced that they scrubbed any reference to that. $20 would be around with the exchange rate for the price on the Japanese store for that content. They now say that they're reviewing pricing. I've left a number of angry comments on their Facebook feed, and I got to say, this has really kind of dampened any excitement or interest that I have in the company in general. Like at this point, and this is coming from a guy that owns many original soundtracks for Square Enix games, has many collector's editions in his possession. This is pretty well is going to guarantee that if I buy any game from them, then it's going to be on a sale and it's going to be a Game of the Year edition.
Well, and on top of that, not only did they announce the Royal Edition, they then announced there's going to be at least 4 more DLC episodes, which they've already mentioned. One will be on Arden, one will be involving Lunafreya and her brother. Who else would it be? Like, are they gonna? They've already did that.
Possibly with Ifrit and go into the origin with what happened with him.
See, I feel like they're going to do that with the Arden episode. Personally, that's the Arden episode based on our FF15 podcast is hands down the one I'm looking forward to the most. But they've already did one about how Noctis's father used to be with that little prequel game. Would it be Cindy? Like, would it be that Admiral guy? But he was addressed in Gladio, wasn't it?
Possibly Gladio's sister, maybe?
Maybe.
I'm trying to remember her name.
You don't interact with her a ton.
Yeah. With that though, I mean, for that series, I mean, how much money are you going to have to plop down to get the whole experience, and how much is the whole experience at this point? There's the anime, there's the movie, there's the video game, there's the DLC packs, there's the Pocket Edition.
There is a Pocket Edition.
There's a new phone game now for. Mm-hmm. It's just saturated to a point, and what really frustrates me with this, I think, is whenever people talk about it in terms of, well, you're getting to support the awesomeness of Final Fantasy. When you pay your power bill, do you think about supporting the awesomeness of electric companies? If you go to a restaurant, do you think about supporting the awesomeness of that restaurant? This is a $6 billion by market cap corporation. Do we do this one about our banking industry? I'm just paying my overdraft fee, just want to support my local bank.
I mean, at this point, it kind of feels like you should have bought an FF15 subscription and you just get the new content as it's doled out.
I think that's the frustration, is that lack of transparency surrounding it.
And so in devil's advocate of them, I don't think they had any idea of how aggressive they were going to be when they put it out. When they put it out, they're just like, we need to get our money back. And then it did really well, so they're like, we got to milk this until people hate it.
And I get the idea of doing some of that with that. I'm not even opposed to the idea of a second season pass based on the success of a first season pass. But what bothers me with that is to go ahead and take your base game, and they've done an admirable job of doing free patches for that base game, mm-hmm. but to then start locking content to say, oh, we never really did anything with the Immortal Core in the Dark World, so we need to go ahead and integrate him into the base game because we just kind of did sloppy writing and didn't resolve anything with that. So we're going to include some content here for that, and you have to pay us money for this content that is being added to the base game. That frustrates me.
I kind of wonder if they're gonna make the Royal Pack free. I know they're all indications say no, but they managed to get a lot of goodwill with FF15, and the Royal Pack is the first time people have been like, you goofed, guys. So I'm curious, because they've been listening to people a lot on this. So I'm curious if they're going to go, yeah, we've re-reviewed this and we've decided that to support our fans, we're not charging money.
What are they going to do with that for the people in Japan who have already paid money for the pack?
Is it already out?
I believe so.
Okay, I'm not sure about that. If I had to guess anything, it'll be like an Assassin's Creed Unity situation where they go, you get this other thing for free now. That'd be my guess. Because the people who paid for the season pass for Unity was such a garbage game, they ended up giving all the DLC season pass content for free. And to reimburse people who bought the season pass, they gave them some other games. So that would be but that's pure speculation. Do you have anything else? All right. So I'll go through mine real quick. The big things for me were the fact that since we've last recorded, I believe they announced a God of War 4 release date, which is super exciting for me because I'm so stoked for this. It is April 20th. So yes, God of War 4, 420 blaze it. And just in the last week, they finally announced a release date for Detroit Become Human. And this is really interesting for me.
I'm sorry, Josh. When you say God of War 4, 420 blaze it, I'm imagining the bearded Kratos now with like a little nice flannel shirt and a little lumberjack thing, just taking a discreet hit from a bong.
Yeah, all right. I mean, it's his. It's how he's bonding with his son.
Yes.
He's just got to connect with the youths. Anyways, Detroit Become Human is coming out May 25th. I hope it's better than Beyond Two Souls. The tech demo for this, Kara, that came out in 2011 was amazing. They didn't announce that it was actually going to be a game until several years later. My hopes are high, my expectations are low. Or maybe I should switch those around. Beyond Two Souls is not good. He tried. But anyways, I'm going to go ahead and just call that a wrap for the news. So that way we can get talking about our topic. And that game is the Super Nintendo game by Enix, not Square Enix, because this predicated their merger, Illusion of Gaia. Now, just with a little background to this is technically considered the second of a trilogy that we only got two of in America. It was Soul Blazer, Illusion of Gaia, and Terra Enigma, which I might be butchering the name on that. Now, Nick, you never played Soul Blazer, did you?
Nope.
I never did either. I know Chris did, but from everything I've been able to gather, it was a good game, not a great game. It seemed pretty generic action RPG. And
I think Chris is going to have some comments for you on the page.
More power to him. This is one of those games I would really like to play Soul Blazer just because those games make up the trilogy, even though none of them are directly related. It's more of a spiritual sequel situation. And Terra Enigma, I've actually mentioned on this podcast before how much I want to play that game, because I've consistently heard it referred to as one of the best action RPGs of all time, just because fascinating. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about the game you and I both played and loved to death, Illusion of Gaia. So, Nick, why don't you tell me the first time you played this game, what your earliest memories of it are?
Okay, so I think I played this game when I was maybe in third or fourth grade.
Mm-hmm.
I had one of those little books of that they got for like $2, so just as some sort of thrift store kind of thing, where it's like Ultimate Super Nintendo Secrets. And to me, that was really almost more just of an advertising kind of thing, because it had little pictures of black and white screenshots of the games, and I could flip through that and see. And Illusion of Gaia was one of those ones where, looking at kind of the monster design for that, then I was just like, wow, this looks so cool. It's a game that's set in the Great Wall of China. Wow, that sounds awesome. So I played it just as a rental at first. I think I did end up. I don't remember if I beat it as a rental or not. I want to say I did, just given how short the game was, and I was able to buy that game later on. And what really struck me with it in terms of the game was, as a kid, was just the overall darkness of the themes. I mean, there's a lot of cheerful moments, cheerful music, a lot of nice things, but there's kind of a tone of darkness of kind of the, I guess I'll call it the evil in the world that permeates everything from the beginning stages where you have the dead explorer for the Incan gold ship, when you find out about the Incans and how they were trying to flee from their land and the king didn't get to them, and that's why the ship is still there. The stuff with the pernicious stuff with the slave trade, that's touched on multiple times in the game. And then the cannibalism / famine that is involved with that slave trade as well. There's a lot of very, very mature themes that kind of left an impact for me, because I couldn't think of a game that had touched on such heavy subject matter previously. I know Chris, in his Behind the Opinion, was talking about Final Fantasy VI and stuff like interracial marriage, genocide, the destruction of the world. Illusion of Gaia, I think, is a good kind of pairing game in terms of games that touch on that heavy subject matter.
And it's interesting because some of those changes were actually an adaptation issue, because I did some research, because even though we've both played this game more times than we can count, there were a number of notable differences between the Japanese release and the English one. And one of them that was specific was the hidden boss, as you mentioned, Jim the Jeweler with the slave trade. He apparently was made a lot darker in the American version. I was personally unaware of that, but I did always think that he was a very dark side. How he said he started the slave trade just to find all these gems. Did you know he was actually a boss from Soul Blazer?
I did.
See, I didn't know that when I was a kid, and never thought to think of it. I always thought Blazer was just the name of the comet, because when you fight the hidden boss in this game, he goes, Blazer was strong, but you were stronger. Now go defeat the meteor or something. So I just thought the meteor's name was Blazer. Never even occurred to me.
When you say he was made darker for the American version, what was he like in the Japanese version?
I couldn't tell you. All I know is that they noted that the English language prototype was different from the final version. An example included the character Jeweler Jim being portrayed as more sinister. So, I mean, the hidden area in and of itself was kind of dark. You go into like this big spooky mansion area where you fight harder versions of all these enemies from like a third of the way through the game. So
with the jewels and the slave trade kind of thing, that's still one of those sections of the game that's difficult to go ahead and encounter whenever I replay it. It's a portion where you have to... Josh's face lit up with recognition as soon as I said that. In the town of Frisia, I want to say it is, then you have a slaver who is looking for an escaped slave. If you find that slave, you can go back to that person and choose to rat out the location for a red jewel. So to get this experience where you go ahead and collect all the jewels and find out the secrets of Gem, you have to rat out a slave.
Yeah,
that continues to be a painful thing to do. I last played this game last year. I was playing it with my fiance, and she was very adamant about, no, you shouldn't do it. And I kind of found myself thinking, at this point, I've turned that poor slave over 3 or 4 times. Why am I continuing to do this? It's not that compelling of a secret, and I don't think I'm going to do that anymore.
Well, and so we'll bring it back into a more linear approach here in just a second, but based on the ending of the game, like, I kind of wonder, on one hand, yes, it is morally wrong to turn that slave over. But at the end of the game, you kind of retcon everything.
And beyond that, even just in the short term, then immediately following doing that, you go to a diamond mine and free a bunch of slaves.
Right. So, again, this sounds like you're trying to be an apologist for turning a slave over, especially since the slavers are portrayed about as sinister as they can get. They're these dark, shadowy figures. You don't see their face. You don't see anything but their beady white eyes.
It's like Jawas if they were taller and less goofy.
Yeah, it's kind of dark. And it's like, oh, you found my slave? Here, I'll give you a gem. Does he even get... I thought he might give you more than one gem.
Just a single.
Gem.
You do get multiple gems at one point. That's actually when you find a slave in that diamond mine. He's trapped in a cave-in, so you have the movement of your hair, and you punch through that wall, and then you get 3 red jewels.
So, we'll go back a bit. Now, did you have anything more about the first time you played? Okay. The first time I played it I was also very young. I remember that, like, my cousin, I was somewhere in the same general age range, and I had a Super Nintendo, and I could tell that they thought to themselves, I want to get this kid a Super Nintendo game. I don't know what a good game is, because they got me the game in one of those, like, rental bags. You know how when you rented games, sometimes you'd get them in, like, the plastic bags. And I could tell they went up to the person like, I need a good game. Like, this one's good. I'd never heard of it before. And one of the things that struck me, even before I played it, was the thickness of the instruction guide. Because they basically gave you a walkthrough in the instruction guide, which fascinated me. It included where the location of all 50 red gems were.
Wow.
That was so weird to me. Do you don't recall that?
I got my copy used without an instruction book.
Yeah, it was a very thick guide. And at the time, it jumped out at me. I'm like, well, this is very strange to me. And I remember when I was playing the game, there were a few things that jumped out at me with the impressions when I first played it. The first one was getting one of the first 3 gems in the starting town. 2 of them were super easy to get. But the third one was a fisherman had to pull a pot up on the fishing dock, but it only happens sometimes. Luckily, it was right outside of you and your friend's little quote-unquote hideout, so you could just keep going in and out and in and out and in and out. But it was random, and I know it happened to you at least once, because it happened to me more times than I can count, where I would see him and I'd immediately go back inside. No!
Yep.
And a lot of this game, when you get to a certain point, you can't go back. So the first time I played through this game, I know you mentioned it's short. It is very short. But when you're a kid, time flows differently. So I remember thinking to myself how long it took me to beat this game. That might have only been like 6 months, though. I really don't know. Because I remember as you're playing through the game, you go through all these different quote-unquote classical ruins, which that was amazing to me as a kid. Going through Incan ruins, going through Babylonian ruins, going through, what would you consider Mu to be?
You know, that kind of strikes me as almost like an Easter Island kind of thing, but I feel like there's an actual mythology there that I'm not aware of. I should do some looking into that.
Yeah, that was a really unusual one. But then you also had your kind of European in Angel Village, and then Angkor Wat, which
Cambodia.
Was... Yep. And then then Great Wall of China, and then Egyptian.
Did the Great Wall of China come before the Angkor Wat ruins?
I
think the direction there is reversed.
But yeah, the Angkor Wat, while it was a very striking area, like, it was almost non sequitur, like, now go here.
It was a really enjoyable dungeon design just as far as scale. Like, the pyramid was a very non-linear dungeon experience. Mm-hmm. And for this one to just kind of have it be that kind of linear, it was... I enjoyed the scale of that. That one takes a couple hours to clear.
I enjoyed that one a lot. It just felt like out of all the dungeons, that one was least tied to the narrative, in my personal opinion.
Well, but you do get that vision about the future. That's the one where it's most explicit about what is going on with the comet.
Mm-hmm. But that was, as a child, the exposure to all these different cultures in a game, I found that to be fascinating, because it actually made me go out and look up stuff about Incan culture, and it made me look up stuff about Babylonian, and I looked up oh my god, Angkor Wat's a real place? That's amazing!
Right. That was a pull-in for me as well. All these things I've learned about in school, just kind of at a very, very basic, superficial level. There's going to be a video game about those things.
Right. And I remember in the Great Wall, when you get there, they actually have the hundreds of terracotta warriors. Oh my god, they incorporated this. And as a child, that was fascinating to me. But they still managed to use that as a framing device for what was... I'm not going to say it's a super engaging story now as that we're older, but it's still really good because, yeah, you're playing as like, what, a 11-year-old?
Some sort of teenager.
Yeah,
11,
you're
12,
young.
13.
And you have the puppy dog love story, and you find out that you actually have some cosmic significance, but it kind of is also, and I'm really glad my girlfriend doesn't listen to these right now, because I give her a hard time every time she wants to watch a coming-of-age movie, but that's what this game was. You start the game out with a whole bunch of your friends. By the time you get through the Incan ruins, you have like 7 of you-ish, but then for various reasons, they start falling off. And they're not always negative reasons. Sometimes they are.
The first and most negative one is the one where your friend Seth is knocked off of the ship and eaten by the whale River Sun, or in Japan known as Leviathan, and absorbs to become a part of Leviathan's conscience later on throughout the story.
That part is very strangely approached, and we'll get to that because this goes on to the differences between the Japanese and the American releases. But yeah, by far, Seth, yeah? Mm-hmm. Okay. Seth is the darkest one that you lose by far. But then you meet your cousin, and at some points, the people are like, well, I just want to stay here because I like this area. And then other people are like, I want to stay here because of my family's here. And then near the end of the game, the little wiener who you didn't think would actually continue to follow you as far as like, I don't want to keep going in the desert. Or you just bail on him, I think.
Well, now Eric is with you on the plane ride whenever Neil drops you off, so he's kind of with you up until near the very end. I think what you're thinking of is you have Lance and Lily, and those two separate from you partially it's that they've declared their love for one another, but also Lance's father is sick and he wants to stay behind to take care of him. I don't think you have anyone who's just kind of full on bails from you for no reason.
Well, and to give some context to names, you start in this town with your friends Lance, Seth, and Eric, and then you get picked up by, some royal guards come to your house. And they're like, oh, you have something we want, we're taking you into the castle. And then from there, your main character, Will, meets up with the Princess Kara, and then basically the journey begins. And so you also meet Lily?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Is she a fairy?
She's from Itori Village, which the elder there spirit resides in a flower garden, but outside of that, they kind of allude to having some sort of mystic powers, but I don't think anything's really ever explored with that other than Lily's ability to transform and fit in his pocket. But I think they're all still humans.
Okay, and the backstory for Will is that his father was a great explorer, and he went to find the Tower of Babel with Lance's father, and they never came back. They're presumed dead. And Will has some weird... He woke up back in his hometown, I think, and he had this flute, and it gave him the ability to move objects remotely. And assumed that Lance's dad was dead, assumed Will's dad was dead. As you progress, you start to uncover more through the ancient ruins about what actually is going on. You start to get these mystic statues, the significance of which is not really explained until after you have the first one, I believe. You beat this giant demonic boss in the Incan ruins, and then while you're traveling to the second continent, I think they tell you that these statues are important, collect all the statues.
Well, that actually happens in the prison whenever your dad speaks to you from the flute. He's the one who kind of tasks you with finding the mystic statues. And with that, it's kind of, the quest begins where it's, well, I'm going to do this because it's going to allow me to reconnect with my father.
And I'm not going to call it a weakness just because I It's been about a year since I replayed it, maybe more like 2. They never really give a ton of context for the statues, do they?
They're pretty well MacGuffins, I believe.
Yeah, if there was any part I considered semi-weak, it's the fact that they tell you to collect these statues, but they never really give great context for it. It's a great reason for you to go, okay, I'm going to these ruins and this ruin and this ruin, but they all just kind of happen to be there. You never really seek them out. I know you get the first one on accident. The second one, they just seem to kind of tie into the second boss. They just seem to kind of be there. It seemed odd to me, which you do you guys, but I feel like there was definitely an opportunity they could have taken there because of near the end, you quote unquote use the statues to be able to fight the final boss. They could have tied some kind of narrative into those statues to make them more plot relevant. But this game did a lot of things that... Oh, go ahead.
I guess with that around the plot, I kind of felt like the main story, I mean, sure, there's a purpose to it in terms of the comment and everything, but in my mind, the focus is a lot more on kind of just showcasing suffering in the world and also having that coming of age, that coming of age of these people going on a journey and kind of finding their way through life together.
Well, and I'm going to at least put a mildly happier counter to the showcasing of suffering in the world, because every time you do see something that is absolutely terrible, for example, I'm trying to think, when you're in the prison near the beginning of the game, you still have the ability to let some people out of the prison. There's always a counter of hope in there.
There's moral agency where the people in the story who are coming of age can decide that they are going to right that injustice. A great example being Neil, with the realization that his parents' company was founded on the slave trade, wants to reform the company.
God, that was dark. So, as you progress through the game, just some of the highlights is that you witness the slave trade on the second continent. Like Nick had said earlier, you can turn the slave over to the slaver, but then you go to the diamond mine and free the slaves, which you're like, okay, well, that's great. Later, I'm trying to remember. Oh, in Angkor Wat, that was it. You see all the starving people, which this was another Japanese difference. This is the most popular Japanese difference, is in the original game, those were cannibals. And all the skeletons outside Angkor Wat in that village were people they ate. In the English version, they all just starved to death, which is still super sad. And then they make it way sadder.
They do allude to that in the American version still, though, because until Hamlet shows up, then it's kind of the assumption is that they are going to eat you.
Yeah, when you go into this village, it seems empty at first, and you find some skeletons, and then the villagers come out, and they do not respect your personal space, and they tie you up, and there's a fire going. Like, uh-oh. And though they never explicitly say these people are going to eat you, you very strongly think they're going to eat you. And though we haven't mentioned this at all because it's kind of a weird non sequitur outside of it, the princess has a pet pig, and the pet pig accompanies you through most of the game. And this is where it gets sad again, because this little adorable pig who's been with you the whole game as you're in this town with all the people starving, the pig decides it's going to make a noble sacrifice and jumps in the fire. And listening to Kara goes, "Hamlet, no!" Like, out of context, goofy. In context, very sad. But then, without getting too into the weeds about this, you find out that the pig willfully made this decision.
Your mother's spirit comes out of the pig's corpse and delivers narration to everyone.
Yeah, I was going to try to avoid that only because it's very strange.
Well, that's one of the things where this game got kind of hippy-dippy at many portions to it. There's a portion where you have you're stranded on this raft with Kara, the princess, and this is kind of the scene where Will and Kara start falling in love with each other. Kara starts being more of a normal person with less royal pretension, and sharks start circling around, and they deliver some narration about humans are the only people that kill things that kill when they're not hungry. It's just that one of those things I was like, yeah, humans are bad as a kid, and then when I learned more about nature, it's like, wait a second, that's a load of bullshit. There's another scene like that where whenever Seth, who is merged with this Leviathan / Riverson, is using Morse code in this underground tunnel to communicate with you all. Right. very loud Morse code that can only be done by throwing your whale body against a tunnel. There's some dialogue there to the effect of, well, it's fine, that I'm part of Riverson. Humans are the only people that think their form is superior. I'm not sure what that's supposed to mean. I do feel my human superiority. Yes, this is true.
Now, it's interesting, because you just mentioned it this way. When I was a kid, because it was called Riverson, I thought it was like a giant bass or something. Like, for some reason, I didn't think it was a whale. Because a Riverson, to me, there's like a Harvest Moon type game where there's something called a River King, which is just like a big freshwater fish. So I always thought a Riverson was kind of like that.
Yeah, but for it to be large enough to knock over a ship and knock someone off...
I just thought it was a really big... Like, I'd never heard of a Riverson.
Okay.
Had they called it a Leviathan, like in the Japanese version, because especially in the mid-'80s to late '90s, Nintendo stripped out all religious references, because that was just their thing. And apparently Leviathan, being a Revelations-level monster in most Christianity... They felt that was too religious to put in a game, even though, had they called it a Leviathan, I would have had some idea of what it was, as opposed to Riverson. I'm like, oh, it's just a giant fish. And
my grandpa has one of those on as well. It talks sometimes, so that's why Riverson can talk.
Take me to the river. Send. Anyways, that was one of those things where, as a kid, I tried to figure out what a Riverson was, and it wasn't until years later when they said, oh, it was supposed to be a Leviathan, that I go, okay, now that kind of makes sense. And there was also some ambiguity as to whether or not this guy who'd been eaten by it was now part of it, or if he had turned into one. Like, the script was weirdly vague about this. My interpretation was he'd been eaten by it, and then somehow he became one, and now he was a separate one from the first one that ate him.
See, I thought it was different. I thought it was that he was part of the consciousness of the first one, which kind of introduced some sort of... So is this like a networked mind? How it's in a single organism? How does this function?
Yeah, I don't know. But the game did... I found this, as a kid, this was great. I love the puzzles in this game, because they weren't always greatly explained. For example... And I was probably just a dumb kid at the time. When they tried to explain to you how to move things, they said use the shoulder buttons. That didn't really resonate with me as a child. Or maybe it said use the L and R buttons. I thought that meant left and right on the D-pad when I was a kid.
The controller literally has L and R written on those
I might have
shoulder
had
buttons.
one of those third-party controllers where it was the bright colors instead of with the label, with the number. So for the longest time... Some other examples of how I was dumb in this game, I couldn't get through the castle dungeon for a minute because for some reason that gold skeleton wrecked me. I'd have no idea why it was difficult now that I am a grown adult. I think it's because I was kind of a giant chicken as a child. So if I saw the skeleton, I'm like, oh, skeleton, woo, scary. And then when the skull flew off for the gold one, I'm like, oh my god, it's coming right at me. And I think I just kind of freaked out and it killed me. I can't think of any other reason.
That's fair.
Anyways, other places where I got stuck as a child was in about halfway through the game when you get to the part with the vampires, the vampire bosses. That was a very dramatic uptick in difficulty for the game at that point. In fact, in the little guide that came with it, it mentions the enemies are about to get a lot harder. So don't feel bad if they start wailing on you, because that's just what happens now. Anyways, the puzzles I always thought were fascinating because they required you to do stuff like you have to just wait for a certain amount of time. That was in the Incan ruins. You had to stand on a glowing tile for... like 30 seconds, a weirdly long amount of time. And there was also a lot of musical puzzles in this game. You got three songs in this game. And it was interesting to me as a child because I'm going to try to figure out the least SJW way to say this. Gender roles were a lot more set in stone back then. So the idea of a protagonist who was playing the flute and not getting knocked out by his friends just was mind-blowing. Flute is not a masculine
You're a child of
instrument.
the 90s.
I am. Like, it didn't make sense to me. I'm like, well, this guy's playing a flute, and he's playing the flute like a boss, and nobody's making fun of him. Like, what am I missing here?
I do want to say, in terms of the puzzles, one of my favorites was in the ruins, was in Mew. Then you have a portion where you have the statues that are facing each other, and you have to put together that you need to check where those statues where the gaze of those statues would meet up, and that connection of multiple screens of, well, there's a statue that's pointing to the right over here, and then back over here on this whole other screen, there's another statue over here that was kind of pointing down. Let me search in this region to find a statue when the chest itself was empty. That was I thought that was really interesting design.
The puzzles, I gotta give it to them, because none of them were super difficult, but all of them were very different. For example, one of the things that they introduced early in the game was your hair moves when there's wind in it. And I know that that is not even considered anything special nowadays. But on Super Nintendo, the idea that the environment was different based on what your character was displaying, mind-blowing to me.
That was an intentional design choice, actually. I recently got a Super Nintendo pixel art book, and with that, it's I believe it's Bitmap Books are the guys that do this one, and he's interviewed some of the creators, and I forget whether it was the producer or the director, but that was kind of, I'll send you the phrasing for it after this discussion for what the rationale was, but that was kind of like, hey, no one's done that before. Yeah. This would be a cool idea.
And it was awesome. Because I know just off the top of my head, not even including when you would just go outside and your hair would start ruffling, there were a couple puzzles. Specifically, there was one in the diamond mine where you couldn't free the guy unless there was no indication other than the wind coming out of the wall. That's where you knew to attack it. And later, when you're doing, again, a really interesting puzzle, you are trying to get Kara back because she's kind of sort of been abducted by an artist. And you have to pick out the differences in every one of these different art rooms. And the last one, the only difference is the fact your hair is ruffling. So, again, very unique puzzle because it's nothing in the room except you. So it makes you kind of think outside the box there. And some of the other things that I found fascinating in this game, and I bet you can speak to this just as strongly, the fact that you could kind of play as different characters for reasons that as a child they were super cool. As an adult they're still interesting but not nearly as cool. You can switch to the Dark Knight Frieden, who's this big burly dude in dark plate armor with a giant sword who you get the ability to shoot fireballs out of, basically. As a kid, that was rad. The explanation as you go through the game, you're descended from these Dark Knights. Like, okay, that is cool, I guess.
Including the gel monster Dark Knight Shadow.
Yes. So, in the pyramid, you get the ability. If that was another, quote, personal weakness, if you ask me. They introduced a new character in the last dungeon.
That I think was a bit of a weakness, but I did really love how that took the non-linearity of Sky Garden, where you can go in any direction, and then also had it where instead of 4 branching paths, it's 6 branching paths, and you can advance partially through these with any character, but there are challenges where you need to be Shadow or Frieden or Will to get the hieroglyph that's at the end of this path.
And that actually, the penultimate solution to that puzzle, because you have to get all the hieroglyphs in the dungeon to open up the door to the boss in the pyramid. However, they allude that there is a trap in that room, and they say any sound will indicate it. Like, well, what do I do? And you get a song at the very beginning of the game from your grandma. And the other 2 songs you get as you progress, they disappear from your inventory once you've used them for your intended purpose. But you keep the song from your grandma. And I thought this was a great kind of bookends situation because the very first puzzle you solve, more or less, uses this song from your grandma. The very last puzzle you solve uses this song from your grandma. Now, it's a little less sweet when you realize that the last song is being used to immolate a mercenary, but...
He's a murderous mercenary. This is a your life or his situation, so...
And that was... I wish they had developed him more. Because we're getting onto this basically out of nowhere, but throughout the whole game, they keep alluding to the fact that it starts at the very beginning. There's a mercenary named Jackal, and you never encounter him until the very end of the game. I feel like there's somewhat of a missed opportunity here. because he is alluded to through the entire game about how murderous and intense, but you never see him until this part in the pyramid at the very end. So it doesn't really feel like you're having a conclusion with him. It's like, oh, it's this guy who just looks like a Friedenreich color with rooster hair. And then you set him on fire graphically. I'm like, oh my God.
His burning corpse starts crawling towards you. It's
graphic. Like, he gets set on fire, and it does that Super Nintendo effect where his whole body is black, his eye is white, and the fire is red. Like, whoa, and he collapses. And then, as Nick said, you see his black charred hand pull himself toward Will. And then his hand just kind of reaches out and falls down.
This was very appropriate for 8-year-old me to play.
Oh my God. But it was super good. Like, yes. Even talking about it now, I kind of want to figure out how I can go replay this game. We've had a couple of these podcasts we've recorded where immediately afterwards I've went and found the game. I did that for Rhythm Heaven after we did WarioWare. Anyways, this game... Oh, go ahead.
One other quick just design note as far as great design was I enjoyed the stakes getting higher once you enter Mu, partly with the difficulty of the enemies, but then also the boss fights, having that boss fight against the vampires, where I'm sure the first time you played, that's not fair, they have 2 life bars, I only have 1. And then you have the ticking bomb that your friend Eric is tied to as well, so it's like, hey, you can't play too defensively here, just so you know. You have 300 seconds, which honestly is more than enough time to take care of this situation, but it was one of those things that as a kid gave you that sense of urgency because you hear the tick-tock sound effect as the bomb's ticking away.
The bosses in that game were almost all fantastically designed. The first major boss gives you a sense of scope because it's the giant demon coming out of a pit, which they don't give you any context for. I think at some point in the ruins they talk about the demon in the ruins, but that's about it. But
the name is Castaroth. I wonder if we look that up if we'll find anything.
We don't. I've checked when I was tried. Yeah. And the second boss was fascinating. That was I don't remember, I think it was called Viper in the
Sky
Garden. That boss was actually redesigned from the Japanese version, and I showed you a picture of this. It was just what did you call it?
I called it a goofy kind of snake thing.
Oh, is that? Okay.
Yeah, that's what we're going to say.
Yeah, it was a weird-looking bird snake thing. And for the American version, they actually gave it a Babylonian-like head with wings attached to it. It looks like something that would have been taken out of Sumerian mythology, which is way better than what it was. And then for the boss after that is these vampires with the time limit. That was, to me, the tensest boss fight in the game, especially if you messed it up and went in there as Will, because you could do that. It's so much harder of a fight.
It's kind of designed for you to do that. As far as your transformations, you have to backtrack to become Frieden and then go ahead and walk all the way back to the section. The closest dark spot will have you entering there as Will.
And I did think it was a bit of a cop-out, because if you kill the vampires as Frieden, when you switch back and you go to free Eric, he'll go, don't worry, I won't tell anybody. Is that how we're... Okay, cool. The one boss that I did feel was a little out of nowhere was the giant worm. Well, even that wasn't out of nowhere. That had a purpose,
because this was a little bit stereotypical. Oh, the ancient Chinese medicine will heal my father. I must go to the Great Wall of China and kill the centipede that's there.
And so they did give a reason for that, but it didn't really vibe with the Great Wall of China thing, which is to say everything else kind of felt like it felt the aesthetic fit the aesthetic of the area. This is just like a giant centipede sandworm. Yep. Like, that felt more Mongolian than Chinese, only because Mongolian deathworm is a thing from mythology. That is my approach on it.
The two countries are close to each other.
Sorry, I'm just thinking of Free Tibet is all.
Free Tibet, Free Taiwan, Free all the other places China wants to invade.
But speaking of emotional resonance, since we were talking about how this was a great game for an 8-year-old, so it's the stereotypical Chinese medicine will save my father, but in the same village that has Lance's father who needs to be cured, you have to play what do they call the game? The cup game?
Russian Dream. Do they call it Russian, or is it just the...
I don't remember, but the idea behind it is there's 5 glasses.
And one is poisoned.
One is lethally poisoned.
I think they called it a Russian drinking game. I'm going to have to verify this.
And so the idea is, it's so you can get camels, I think, so you can cross the desert. Or is it? No, it's the kangaroo things, isn't it?
They serve the role of camels where they can go through the desert without water, but they kind of hop around like a kangaroo. Mm-hmm. It's a hybrid called a crook.
And you have to win them from this guy who has been awesome at this Russian drinking game. And so the game won't let you just die, because if you select the poison one, your character will go, this looks suspicious. Are you sure you want to drink it? And because you, he goes first. Mm-hmm. And you get all the unpoisoned ones. They go, we know this has to be poisoned because you haven't died from the other one.
Now, you can drink the one that says it looks suspicious.
And it will kill you instantly.
Yep.
And when you get to the end, the farmer goes, I'll drink the last one. That's the rules. And everybody's trying to keep him from doing it. They're like, you don't have to do this. Like, no, it's
You've already lost.
You've already lost. He's like, all those other people died because of me. And the last thing before it blacks out is he brings the cup to his lips and pours it back. Like, whoa. And then you get the letter where he found out he was terminally ill. Like, Jesus Christ, game.
This occurred after that scene, but I found myself thinking of that scene whenever you had the Croatian general on trial for war crimes go ahead and publicly drink the poison in front of the court recently.
Innocent! Anyways, yeah.
The saddest scene from that afterwards is you're talking to his wife, and she tells you about how you don't need money to be happy in life. All you really need are the people that you love. And you find out in his journal that he had already been dying of a terminal illness, and this was his way of trying to. So that lightens the blow a little bit, but it's still just a very kind of dark, reflective kind of moment to encounter as a child.
This was a very introspective game, which was not something I was prepared for playing this in elementary school. And
took us to a place.
Definitely, and that's why we actually had intended on recording this episode several weeks ago. I'm like, Kraus, let's record an episode about something you love because I have been giving you the sad episode. Let's record something on Illusion of Gaia.
And I was like, oh, yeah, so we talked about that World War I game and about the suffering in games. Then we talked about Lisa. So let's follow that up with Illusion of Gaia, with the slave trade and death. And
well, that's the thing. Like, yeah, we both love this game. I'm like, it's much less dark. Well, except there's slave trade, and there's the starvation, and near the end of the game, there's child labor. And
there's also that section where you get to the village of Dao, that kind of Egyptian parallel place where you have the girls knitting the carpets, and their slave master basically tells you these carpets take 80 years to weave. These girls will spend their entire life making this carpet. Understand, little man, that some are born to misfortune.
Oh God! Even now, that's a dark line.
One interesting kind of callback that they did with it is in the first dungeon. Then you find this letter from on this corpse where it's these guys' children writing to him, wishing him luck on his journey and asking him to come back safe. And about halfway through the game, another 8 or 9 hours in, you actually find his kids, and they don't know that their dad is dead.
And so I hope we've adequately given a rounded picture of why we like not just pure fanboying for this game. We tried to really address the different facets that made this game very strong for us and continuing to be strong. Not like Metal Gear Solid, where now when we look back, we're like, God, what were we thinking?
Do you think love can blossom, Josh, even on the battlefield?
Ugh, God. I'm just thinking about Metal Gear Solid 2 now. God. Anyway, so let's go ahead, because this game is, 20 some odd years old? 25 years old, I think. I think it came out in 93 or 94.
Yeah.
So what you find out at the end of the game, and we are coming up near the end, is why I want to bring this, and one of the reasons it's remained strong for me, is you find out that this comet that they've been referring to the whole game has the ability to rapidly, quote-unquote, evolve organisms. It speeds up the passage of time tremendously. And why do you need to stop it? I don't remember why you have to go fight it.
I think it's because it ends up corrupting things and basically turning things into monsters. It's kind of a dark comet energy, and you're like light energy, and your light energy makes it so that the evolution is a better evolution.
Got it.
That's one more quick little dark scene is at that tower. Then you talk to one of those spirits there, and it says, "I was dying of a terminal illness through the combat's light, then I never die. I felt more alive when I had a terminal disease."
Well, and at the very end of the dungeon, you find your dad's skeleton, because everybody in this dungeon gets rapidly, quote-unquote, evolved into being these spirit forms. And when you meet your dad's spirit, he says, you need to go stop this comet because it's unnaturally progressing things. You need to send them back to how they're supposed to be. You go up, you fight this comet. It's a very epic seeming fight, but you can abuse the mechanics to make it a complete and total joke. But what really blew my mind as a child, and it's still a fun reference, is the fact when you defeat it, the world turns into the modern day world. I just thought that was kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, well, we don't know if we'll ever encounter each other again. And I didn't understand the significance of this when I was a child, but they changed the not the loading screen, but like the profile of the world from the Tower of Babel being at the middle to a high-rise tower being at the middle. Like, what are you trying to say here, game developers? But the stinger shows that, they actually all found each other and they're still friends.
It was a real sad moment whenever you have Will and Kara talking about their separation and promising that they'll spend forever trying to find each other to reconnect with their love, and then immediately afterwards it's like, and I'm glad that they did this because this is the ending, but it's like, don't worry, we gave you so much sad, these two do actually find each other again.
Mm-hmm. If you do want a sad ending, from my understanding, the ending of Terranigma does not have a happy ending. So, anyways, this was a game, and I'll let you give your final thoughts on it first, but I still love this game. So,
I think it's a game that has fun action mechanics, very light RPG mechanics in the sense that, you don't have to kill all the monsters, but you'll be very underskilled if you don't.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the writing and the lore stand up very well with each other. I think it's got great puzzle design. People talk about whether games age, and I think this one counts as being a timeless game to the extent that the design that it has still holds up.
The plot, I still think, is solid. I don't think the music is still on point. I'm trying to remember, is it the Angkor Wat soundtrack that, so many of these tracks are amazing.
From the Earth and Womb, I think is my favorite one. That's the one that goes like boom, 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 boom.
Oh yeah, that's the one when you're in the dark space, isn't it? Yeah.
If anything has aged poorly with the game, I think it's just the limitations of the medium, in the sense that the script itself it has points that could have been explored more, like we talked about about the stuff for the main story. If you compare a modern RPG script just in terms of size to the script for this game, that's going to be a little bit lighter of an experience, with things possibly seeming more superficial. But I think they do a lot with the themes that they're working to develop.
The only thing that I was not a fan of is the fact that because there's no currency, because, like you said, very light RPG elements, you have a finite amount of healing items, which as a child was an incredible limitation for me. It was very difficult for me to beat the hidden boss because I run out of healing items. And the game, hidden boss was designed to be hard. So it was, and I don't know how difficult it is now. I haven't played the game in a couple of years.
That was also a tough section, is that boss rush at the end where you have limited healing. You have to fight through 3 or 4 bosses in a row, including the vampires and the Egyptian mummy queen back to back.
That is correct. The one thing they do to mitigate that is the fact they have not upped anybody's defense. So, for example, the first 2 bosses take about 45 seconds to kill, because I think the first boss in particular might take 5 hits. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. But not everything about the game has aged tremendously, but almost everything. I've recommended some people I support on YouTube to cover the soundtrack because I think it's an underrepresented game. I've wanted so much for them to have a virtual console version of it. I'd pick this up tomorrow if they released it on the Switch's virtual console, which doesn't exist at the time of this recording. But this game was an absolute gem, and I wish it was better received, because this is one of those games I've never heard anybody go, oh yeah, that game sucks. But what I have heard is I've never heard of that game before, which is a bummer. Now our circles are a little more into it, But a lot of people who just casually played Super Nintendo are like, I'm not sure what Illusion of Gaia was. Anyways, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Nope.
All right, fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Nick, for coming on.
Thank you, Josh.
Have you played this game before? What were your thoughts on it? Did you think it was better than Soul Blazer, worse than Soul Blazer? Did you play Terra Enigma through a ROM? Do you think that's something that everybody should enjoy? Did you actually hate this game? Are you that guy? If so, weigh in online and let us know. But until next time...
Tell us your least favorite song. This is a place for negativity.
Boo. My name is Josh, and this is Co-Opinions.